It's that time to put our illustrious guest on the phone. We have Mike Matthews from Electro-Harmonix. Mike, are you there?
I'm here.
How are you, sir?
Great.
For those of you out there, Mike, I guess, I don't know if it was your first project, but I remember many years ago the Mike Matthews Freedom Amp.
Yep, that was back in around 1970.
Really?
Yeah, we started the company back in '68.
Yeah. And did you have a partner back then?
No, I said we, but no, I had no partners. It's been me all the way.
That's and the Mike Matthews Freedom Amp. How many batteries did it take? D batteries?
That had 40 D batteries in a special pack, and it was loud. It was loud as hell.
Oh, it was amazing. I wish I had mine because they're a collector's item. You still got one hanging around?
Nope. I'm not a collector.
No. Okay. How many did you make of those?
God, I don't know, a few thousand.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, they were the flavor of the month there for a while. Everybody and their mother had to have one.
They were a fun amp. That was a loud amp, and what the dealers liked was that it was so small.
Yeah, exactly.
It just had one 10-inch speaker.
Yep. And it had good tone.
It had good tone. The secret was that we had a special capacitor.
Okay.
That would hold up the tone. Because when you pick plucks the strings, the battery voltage would dip, and this would keep that voltage up there a little bit longer.
Then back in those days, I became a professional guitar player, and one of my pedals that was my signature sound was one of your Electric Mistress Deluxes.
Oh yeah, the very first. We were the first company to bring out a low-cost flanger.
Yeah.
Before that, the flanger could only be done in the studios by rocking the tapes.
That's true.
And we jumped on a company called Redicon came out with the first company to come out with Bucket Brigade integrated circuit.
Yeah.
And we jumped on that and brought out the Electric Mistress.
That was a great piece of gear. I wish I had mine because they're collector's items again too.
Well, currently we make something called the stereo Electric Mistress.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Because you can combine both flanging and chorus at the same time. And it's super rich with 180 degrees out of phase coming out of each channel if you use 2 amps.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
I got a question for you. How hard has it been to stay as one of the best pedal builders all this time and to keep your head above water with all these people making pedals in the industry?
Well, I'll tell you something. First of all, my head wasn't always above water. I went belly up in the early 80s.
Oh, really?
And came back again in the early 90s with Electro-Harmonix. In between, I started up doing business with Russia because I found out at the time that all of the old pedals I made was selling for 4, 5, 10 times what I used to sell them for.
Exactly.
And the vintage market evolved. But you come out with one new pedal, and as you're developing it, you come up with 3, 4, 5 new ideas.
Exactly.
So our latest product, which we just started shipping a week and a half ago, is the Ravish sitar pedal, and it makes you sound. I mean, it makes the guitar sound exactly like a sitar.
Now that'd be cool.
And there's a bunch of other flavors in there too. It's great, and we got a whole bunch of ideas that we'll be working on soon.
Now the small stone phase shifter.
Right.
That I heard was one of the most sought after pedals going.
Well, back in the early 70s, the first phase shifter was bought out by a company named Maestro,
yep.
Owned by Chicago Musical Instruments.
I remember them. I had one.
And that was hot. And so we worked on coming out with a phase shifter.
Uh-huh.
And then right before we brought out, one of the prototypes had a weird sound, and that was really good. Sometimes you're working on something and accidentally you discover something.
Exactly.
And what we discovered by accident was feedback.
Really?
And and meanwhile, so we captured this feedback, and at the same time, MXR came out with their phase shifter, the Phase 90.
Yeah, the 90.
And it became real hot. But when we came out with ours, that also had the feedback as an extra feature, and we're able to offer ours at half the price because theirs used FETs, and you had to select the FETs. And so it was much more expensive to build, but ours used these transconductance op amps. And we were able to sell ours at half the price, and then MXR made a big blunder and came out with pedals in plastic housings, and they collapsed.
Oh, big time.
And the Small Stone was our biggest selling pedal of all time monthly. We were building and selling 6,000 a month.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, I've got one for you. Then we're going to get to some of the... We want to get to the new stuff, but we got to cover some of the old. The LPB1.
That was our very first product, and that also was an accident. What happened was at the time, I was working at IBM selling computers. But I was also selling fuzz tones, which I had made at a contractor, and Guild Guitar, Al Drons, the founder of Guild Guitar, wanted to buy all of them. And in those days, fuzz tones were hot because of the Rolling Stones' smash hit "Satisfaction."
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Then along came Jimi Hendrix, who happened to be a best friend of mine back. Because I used to promote a lot of rock and roll shows, and that's a long story in itself, my friendship with Jimi Hendrix.
Ah, cool.
And everybody wanted to sound like Jimi Hendrix. So and he was able, just vibrating his finger, to get that long, sweet sustain.
Exactly.
So one of my buddies at IBM told me to look up this inventor from Bell Labs. He's got about 150 pioneer patents for Bell Labs, and I gave him the project to develop this distortion-free sustainer for me. Now, sustaining a note was not a problem in those days. As the signal died out, you would just automatically bring up the gain.
Yeah, exactly.
The problem was when you all of a sudden pick a new note, there'd be a burst of signal, and the electronics at those times, you'd get these pops and clicks. When you hit a new note. Exactly. So we were trying to get that out, and I went out to his lab to try out his latest prototype. And by the way, I'm a keyboard player, not a guitar player.
Okay.
So I'm just plucking on one string. and plugged into his prototype was this little box. I says, "Well, Bob, what's that little box?" He said, "Oh, didn't realize that the guitar signal was like a little too low, so I built this." This one transistor preamp to boost up the signal. So I plugged the guitar in, and I hit the switch on that thing, and bang! The amplifier was so loud. Now in those days, all the amps you could turn them up to 10, and they'd still be clean.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, but with this thing, the amp would get much louder, and then if you just brought the volume up even more, it would start to get into overdrive.
Yeah.
And that was the very first unit that gave overdrive. And in fact, I exhibited it. In those days, the trade shows were in the I forget the name of the hotel in Chicago. And the exhibitors would exhibit in the rooms, and people, the dealers, it was a dealer show, would wait online to see what this thing was. And waiting online was a guy by the name of Hartley Peavy, the founder and owner of Peavy Electronics. And he tells a story how he waited online a half an hour and finally bought one of these things, the LPB1. And he brought it back to his room, opened it up, and he was flabbergasted. It only had one transistor. And he used that in his amp, and that was his first amp that became a big hit. And that was while I was at IBM, and I started selling a mail order, and sales were, like brisk and picking up more and more. So that's when I quit IBM and founded ElectroHarmonix in 1968. That was our first pedal.
And I'm glad you did, I'll tell you that.
Me too.
Oh, yeah. Now, over the years, there's been a whole spectrum of pedals that you did. You even do tubes now for amps.
Well, that goes back to the Russia thing.
Yeah.
In 1979, in those days, I was selling to a lot of the communist countries like Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. And one day, I got a letter from Russia, from the Soviet Union, inviting me to exhibit at the first consumer trade show open to Western companies.
Huh.
Now, usually I would take just one guitar player to a trade show to demonstrate the products. But this is Russia. I said, well, we're doing all this business in Hungary and Poland, et cetera, and this is Russia, the heart of communism. I gotta go check it out. And I ended up bringing all my favorite players, especially this guy Cookie on drums, who had such a really great counter kick. So I brought 6 musicians, including myself. I was playing organ, and we exhibited in Russia. And we would demonstrate the pedals, but 3 times a day the band would go on. Now, this is a big trade show in Sokolniki Park, and some countries like Colombia and India, they have their own buildings. In my building, there was about 20 Japanese companies, 30 German companies, only 2 American companies, the other being Levi, the dungaree company.
Yeah.
So, but 3 times a day the band would go on, and when the band go on, these guys rocked. The whole fairgrounds would shut down. Everybody would crowd in, come in to see these crazy rock and rollers from America. But from a financial standpoint, at the end of the show, everybody wanted to buy our products, all these Russian trade groups, but they had no money. So I started thinking, well, they have no money, then they need dollars. And I started thinking, what could I buy from Russia? And I first started buying these very cheap integrated circuits, which worked. But then in 1988, when I went and visited in those days everything was centrally controlled, the Ministry of Electronics, hanging on the wall, I saw vacuum tubes. And I said to myself, which these vacuum tubes? Those are used in guitar amps. And I brought back some samples, called up my friend Jesse Oliver. He recently passed away, and he designed all the early Ampeg amps, all the great Ampeg amps.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And he checked and he says, Mike, these tubes are good. So I started selling the tubes. Now, remember, Electro-Harmonix was out of business in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. So I started importing these tubes to my apartment, and when it reached a stage where I couldn't see the Knick games, I finally got my first loft, and the tube business grew, and eventually I was the first American invited into this city, Saratov, where the factory was. And in those days, in Russia, everything was a military factory.
Oh, yeah.
And you weren't allowed to refer to them by name. They all had numbers, It was crazy. So, and eventually, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the whole industrial complex, military complex collapsed, and they're all desperately looking for ways to make money. And this factory, which made integrated circuits, vacuum tubes, certain unusual optical devices, broke up into several pieces, and they spun off the vacuum tube factory as an independent company. They borrowed money from a Russian bank, and then a few years later they couldn't pay him back, so they said to me, Mike, either we're going to sell the factory to you or sell it to your competitor Groove Tubes, or we're just going to have to close. So I ended up buying the factory.
Cool. That's great.
And but meanwhile, in parallel with that, I realized that all the vintage market developed. Everybody wanted these old Electro-Harmonix products, and they weren't rare. I mean, I built tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pedals. And so I found another Russian small military company that made electronic training equipment in St. Petersburg, and they retooled all the chassis, the foot switches, the PC boards, and I came out with the early Russian big muffs, baseballs, and the small stones, made them in Russia, and then eventually started making the stuff again in New York.
That's pretty cool. Now, what new pedals do we got out now?
Well, a hot new product. I mean, this is taking off like a son of a gun. The Ravish sitar pedal, which I told you about.
Yeah.
Before that, we brought out the Deluxe Memory Man with tap tempo.
Yeah.
Deluxe Memory Man is something that we brought out back in the mid-'70s. We were the first company also to bring out a low-cost echo unit.
Yeah.
And first units was the Memory Man using these Redicon chips. But for these longer delays, they were a little bit noisy. And then Panasonic came out with these much quieter, longer bucket brigades. And that's when we came out with the Deluxe Memory Man. And then one of the reasons that I went out of business is Panasonic didn't give us the chips they did at the beginning, but then they gave all the chips to Japanese competitors for these karaoke machines, and so we couldn't get it. But meanwhile, that product, the Deluxe Memory Man, just has a really, really warm sound.
Yeah.
And so recently we brought up the Deluxe Memory Man with tap tempo using these chips, but these chips are really hard to get because Panasonic stopped making them about 13 years ago.
What are you using now?
Well, we're using those chips when we can find them. But another chip, well, that goes out to 1,100 milliseconds. Our original Deluxe Memory Man was 550 milliseconds, and that can use an alternate chip, which is in fair supply.
Yeah.
So we also, in a few weeks, we're bringing out the Deluxe Memory with tap tempo only at 550 milliseconds so that you could still at least get it until we find more MN 3005, the longer bucket brigades.
That's cool.
And then, actually, there's something that we're working on that could be our biggest pedal of all time, but unfortunately, I can't tell you what it is. If you want, give me a buzz in January.
Yes, we definitely will. After you come back from NAMM?
Yeah, hopefully this will be out. We'll show it at NAMM. It's all designed. We filed for a patent. The tooling for the chassis is all done. There's just a slight wrinkle on one part that we're waiting for a sample. So we'll have actually a whole line of pedals with this thing. I just can't tell you what it is.
Let's talk about the Ravish for a second. Did you get the name from Ravi Shankar?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
In fact, I suggest your listeners go to YouTube, and in YouTube, just type in EHX space Ravish, and you could listen to a variety of demonstrations of this amazing pedal. That's
pretty cool.
It's wonderful.
What do we have in store for the well, we're going to find out in January. What else do we have in store for the future of Electro-Harmonix and Mike Matthews?
Well, we're doing really great with our bass big muff.
Okay.
In fact, the Big Muff, which we brought out in 1969, we still sell thousands of them a month. Over 40 years after we first brought it out, which is pretty rare for an electronic consumer product.
That's amazing.
And then I was noticing from our warranty cards a few years back that a lot of people wanted to see products for bass guitar. So we brought out this bass Big Muff, and it's a very big seller. And now I'm thinking of bringing out a more advanced model that has some additional features.
That's great. Mike, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I'm really proud to have you on the show. I got to say, the music industry wouldn't be anywhere where it is in its technology without you. You've done so much for the guitar player, the bass player, everybody. I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Well, don't hang up your rock and roll shoes. Get down on your guitar tonight.
Oh, absolutely.
And email me the broadcast time. And
you got it, Mike. No problem.
Rock and roll.
Rock and roll, brother. Thank you very much. And I will be back in touch with you after NAMM, and we'll have you back on the show, and we'll talk about what the new thing.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.